This is the Domino Theory. I'm your host, Rick Doherty. So, very excited today to have this particular guest on the show, Briana Gervat. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, Rick, thanks for having me. This is great.
It's so great that you are actually out in nature right now doing a walk because we are going to be talking a lot about a very, very important hike that you made, and it turned into your book, There Will Come Soft Rains. So, you have combined two of my absolute favorite things, getting out in nature and hiking, and then, of course, history. So, why don't you explain this book a little bit? Because it's not just about putting on those hiking boots and getting out there, it was about experiencing something very, very important.
Yeah, no, it totally was. And I'm so glad that you love nature and history because I feel like that makes a big difference when you're having a conversation with somebody. Like, well, do you love it that much? Is it a passion of yours too? Yeah, no. So it was after COVID. Like, I've always been a historian, an art historian, and stuff like that. And I am a writer. And when I learned about the Western Front Way, the only thought in my head was, when do I go? And it wasn't how do I get there, what do I do when I get there, it's when do I go. And from the start, when I first learned about it in March, April of 2022, and then I left in August, so it was like a very quick turnaround. And I just tried to read as much as I could about World War I that I hadn't already read. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I get to spend an entire month camping outside in the farms and mountains and everything of France. And it was just so, it was like my soul was guided to do this.
Absolutely. And I sort of have a similar story where I was, locked down during COVID. I lost like three jobs. And at the time, I was also a travel agent. So you could imagine that that was a difficult time for me. And I decided that one of the things I was going to do is late at night after I was able to go out, I was just doing really long walks from like 10 at night till sometimes, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And I was doing these long walks. I lived in a city at the time, so I had lighting and, better conditions. But obviously, I didn't want to do it during the day because we weren't supposed to, you know, be around people. So
Right.
I was doing that at night. Plus, I lived in Florida at the time and it was hotter than the surface of the sun during the day anyway. So
It
I was doing a lot of those walks, but I was also taking courses on Curiosity Stream. I'm like, you know what? I'll just sign up for 2 free months because hopefully by the end of the 2 free months, I will, be back to working. That was a pipe dream. But anyway,
I
I
think we all had so
really
many pipe
got
dreams during COVID. We were
right.
like during COVID, we're like, oh no, this will happen and this will happen. At least you got those walks in though. At least you were out there for hours at a time.
And then I started taking a course on Ireland. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to find a hike in Ireland. And then in 2022, I hiked Ireland's National Famine Way. And that sort of reminds me of your story, how you found this one during the COVID lockdowns, and then you went out and you did it. So, what was it about specifically World War I and this trail that wanted you to get out and tell that story?
I think that's a great question. I love that question. I think that especially during COVID, like, how you were out and about in the world, like I was living in Southeast Georgia too. I think we probably had similar cultural experiences that we were able to get out a lot more than other places in the country. But again, for people like us, that wasn't enough. So, during the beginning of COVID, when everybody was talking about that it's like, oh my God, here are the 1920s. And they got so excited that, like, the 20s were going to be like the roaring 20s. And it was just, as a historian, you're like, you understand what happened in the 1920s, right? It wasn't all prohibition and flappers. It was some heavy duty stuff. And so I think that, as a historian, as someone that loves history, it's hard to watch other people talk about it as if it's set in stone, or that there's not a fluidity. And so, especially World War I, I feel like it was a pivotal point. It was a pivot point in history, that there was everything before World War I, and then the Great War, and then there was everything after. And so for me to be able to have the opportunity to walk through that and to reflect upon it was just, it was my heart's calling.
That is phenomenal. So behind me, I have a Bob Dylan record. And the reason I have this record is because of a different video I'm doing, but it also has the song on it called With God on Our Side. And in that song, there is the line, "The First World War, boys, it came and it went. The reason for fighting I never did get." And I love how that sort of personifies how a lot of, especially Americans, because the war didn't happen here, right? It happened
Right,
over in Europe. And especially even, people our age, we didn't really know anybody who fought in World War One. We might have known a lot of people who were in World War Two, but World War One sort of became this footnote, and the only thing we really learned about World War One was how it impacted the start of World War Two, right?
right, right,
It was sort
absolutely.
of a side comment. So, did you feel through this book and through this journey, you have been able to tell the story of a war that it's unbelievable that you can say World War One was almost forgotten, but really it
Right.
kind of was a forgotten war.
And that's what's so heartbreaking, is that, you walk through the French landscape and even into Belgium, and there's no forgetting. You are reminded with every step of the way that there was a war. And not only was there a great war, but there was a war that came after, and there were many wars before that. So the fact that we look at it and we just think, oh, 1914 to 1918, and, like, you see those t-shirts that say back to back world champions, and it's like, dude, come on, like, it's so much more complicated than that. You can't ignore what happened and the power dynamics and the struggle that were taking place over the course of the war, and what happened after, or even before. It was just this huge evolution of politics as we know it now. Like, there are people that will argue, oh, they were fighting for democracy and freedom, and I'm like, that's easy to say in hindsight, but that's not the truth at all in the actual process of fighting.
Absolutely. I mean, there were monarchies on both sides. There were, what we would call democracies on both sides. I think that when you have a war like World War II, and I think even, as we're looking at the
I think the
250th
wars that we tend to
anniversary of the
talk about
United
a little more
States
are.
are ones like World War II, the Civil War, where maybe we can sort of see a quote unquote good guy in that dynamic, but a murkier, kind of more confusing, a little more politically entangled war like World War One doesn't quite have the same narratives as a war like World War Two. Obviously, you look at World War Two and you're like, it's pretty easy to tell who was the good guys in this one, like the ones who didn't invade Czechoslovakia and some of those situations. But that doesn't mean that the sacrifice of the people who went and fought was any less. I mean, they put the same things on the line and they risked their lives, and many of them, thousands upon thousands of them, died. And, whether we know the reasons or whether the reasons are easy to decipher, I think that we don't want those sacrifices to be lost.
No, not even like you. I think you really, really summed it up. I think that, like I think that's why people probably, aside from the fact that most of our grandparents did fight in World War II, or we know people that did, and we learned it. It was, there were still people living that had experienced World War II that were able to tell their stories, that we were able to sit and listen. And that was a big deal. Like by the time we got to be in elementary school, no one we knew was in, like, there might have been people that were still alive that fought in the Great War, but generally speaking, it was something that was almost dismissed because, at the end of the war, there was so much loss, so much for nothing, that people came home and they didn't, and my mother will always say that my grandfather came home and didn't talk about the war. Like they never really, it was never really a discussion as much as it was later on in their lives. But like World War I, it was almost like you're home now, shut your mouth and keep it moving. And, like, despite the fact that you might have seen revolutions in the country that you return to, if you even had a country to return to, we have it's just crazy. It's crazy. And so, yeah, I think that World War I is something that is so rich in so many things, but we don't want to remember it because then we have to think, well, that was one of the bloodiest wars in all of history, and for what reason? Because you could sit there and say, oh yeah, Germany, like on the armistice slab, it says something about like Germany wanting to, like they wanted to vanquish us and put us under slavery. I'm like, is that what Germany wanted to do? Maybe in the Second World War, but not in the first. Germany just like wanted to, be united under Bismarck and maybe have all of Europe united under, like it was still, there was still all this upheaval in Germany at the same time too. So it's like, there was never a united front. There was a Western front, there was a movable Eastern front, but no country was sitting there and being like, oh no, we all support every single thing that's happening.
Absolutely. And I know that when I did my pilgrimage in Ireland, and I did it to raise money for a domestic violence charity, and I was also on the National Famine Way. So it's a very different type of commemoration than World War
Right.
One, but it was a similar struggle, and the people who walked it before me were dealing with, some of the worst experiences people have had to deal with in hundreds and hundreds of years. And I think that that always led to a really great perspective. Like when you do a hike like this, when you do a pilgrimage like this, you're going to have days where your knees are just absolutely killing you. Or, you get a blister or whatever it is. And you're having days that you're struggling. And it's so incredible when you pick a route like this to go, you know what? My struggle is absolutely nothing compared to the people who were fleeing hunger and trying to find a
Yes.
better life, or the domestic violence survivors, or in your case, the people who were fighting this incredibly deadly war, this war that was being fought with 19th century tactics and 20th century weapons. And there were times
Yes.
that this was just an absolute bloodbath. And it must have been horrors that the people never could move past. And when you're dealing with the fact that you can't find a good meal along the trail, it starts to put that into perspective a little bit.
Yeah, when you say it like that, it's so true. Like you go along the famine way, and then you were hit with the reality of the fact that these people were starved. And not only were they starved, but like a lot of people came over now to our country to create a better life or to be away from that. And you can't deny that. And the fact that there is a pilgrimage that you can take to commemorate that and to acknowledge the fact that this happened in history and we can't forget about it is a beautiful thing. And yeah, you're right. You put it in perspective because these people were starving and they were starved purposefully. And if you can't find a meal, you know that within a few hours or the next day, you will have a meal. You won't be watching people die of hunger, or that you won't see the repercussions of malnourishment in the future generations. Like we live in a very privileged world that we're able to walk in those ways and still remember and still maybe hopefully help other people to remember.
And I know a lot of times there is this reputation that Americans who go to certain places are not welcomed very much and they are, shunned. And obviously, a lot of this, if not all of this walk, was in France, in Belgium. Those are places that are not always given the best reputation for being welcoming to Americans. So, how did you feel as far as that was concerned when you were on this journey?
I never felt that, except maybe in Belgium for like a hot second. But when I was in France, I never once was like, oh my God, they're treating me a certain way because I'm American. Like I would walk down the street, and I mean, maybe this is just my disposition or whatever, but I walk down the street and people are like, bonjour. Like and the French do that. The French say hello. Like it's rude if you don't say hello. And then with the backpack, like the French are very active, and so it's one of those. They were very inquisitive and curious, but there was never an instance where I felt unwelcome. There was never a time, there was times that they're like, wait, what are you doing? They're like, by yourself? They're like, are you crazy? But like, generally speaking, I was never made to feel like I was an outsider. I never felt like, as an American walking in the footsteps of World War I soldiers that, in a way I'm an outsider because we weren't there for very long. We were there for 18 months, but generally speaking, no, I had the opposite of what other Americans go through when they go to France. Everybody's like, "You hungry? Do you want to eat? Come eat. Drink wine. Here's some water. Do you have a place to stay?" They welcomed me with open arms, and I think it was just because they saw that I loved France. They saw me that I was there, and I wanted to remember.
What is the scar of World War One, and for that matter, World War Two, that you find when you are over there? I know that when I was in Ireland and I was in some of these very small, very separated locations that aren't maybe the major cities, you could still see that residual trauma from that event. And when you are walking along the Western Front like you were on your journey, do you still see some of the generational trauma that is still there from these two catastrophic wars that really were centered in that location?
Oh, absolutely. Like you said, like passing through those smaller locales where you are reminded that, that's what people were escaping from or they were running away from I don't know if there are commemorative plaques. Are there plaques all throughout the famine way?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So imagine the same thing for World War I and World War II. I think that people, they want to have reminders. They like, as much as it hurts, as much as it's heartbreaking, to have those reminders to let people know that this is something that cannot be forgotten is so poignant. And so there's literal scars in the landscape, especially for the Great War. You see the trench lines, you see the billowing trench lines, you see craters. There's still these massive craters that were created from heavy artillery fire, and then you see bunkers and concrete machine gun nests. So the visuals are there. You can't step anywhere on the Western Front without being reminded that there was a war. And then you go into different cities along the way, and they're not very close on the wall, so like not eye height or head height or anything, but a little further up, if you know where to look, on plaques on the wall, they will have a date and then a name, and they'll say that they died for France during the resistance. So you have a lot of the fighting that happened, especially after D-Day, that took place throughout not only the Western Front area, but throughout a lot of France. That shows you that that there were people that were still resisting, even during the occupation and up until the liberation. And even after the liberation, people were still there was people that were obviously collaborators. And but then you have I forget what they were called in France. The people, like, it was like the last minute heroes, the people that like pretended that they resisted throughout the war, but like really just came out, when the allies were marching on Paris. Like then they were like, oh no, we didn't support any of this. But Then, but you remember then what happened during World War One. You remember the devastation, the travesty, and you realize that, like, I don't know, if you saw your father come back without a limb or not come back at all, and your mother suffer, and there's still being hunger, and there's still being pollution and remnants of the war for your entire life, how much of a fight would you put up? You know what I mean? Like, if you
Right.
saw it, you'd be like, what is the point? You know, why does it matter? The Germans are just going to come in. There's going to be another prolonged war. What is the point? You can't fight it. You cannot fight human nature.
Wow, what a great perspective. So, I know that as Americans, we're in this situation where, for the most part, the major wars have been fought overseas, at least for the past 150 years, right?
Yes.
Since the Civil War. And that's another one of those wars that, through the course of time, has been viewed more heroically than where we really focus on the devastation and the suffering and some of those things. When you are seeing these plaques and these commemorations of all of the sacrifices that were made by the French during the Great War and during World War II, and you're seeing the scars on the landscape, and it's really making you, people who haven't done a hike, I don't think they realize how much you really are immersed in that place when you are doing it. You are waking up every day and you are in that environment from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, and you are not living off the land anymore, but you're sort of living off the land. The surroundings are way more present, are way more obvious to you, and you're more aware of your surroundings when you're doing something like this. So, as Americans, we don't get to see those things. We don't get to be immersed in them as much.
Yeah.
But did being immersed in that horror and seeing those scars and seeing those things, did that sort of give you a different perspective on all war and all fighting, that you sort of not only saw the sacrifice that was made by mostly men, but men and women,
Right.
and also not only the sacrifice, but the waste of a generation of people who, could have, any one of them could have been the person who cured cancer or invented some amazing technology that we now don't have because of it.
Oh, absolutely. Like, you think about that. Like, I think about all the artists. Like, you read the poetry of these incredibly gifted young men, and then you see that they wrote this poem in 1915, and then they died in 1917, or they died a week later after writing the poem, or anything else like that. So there was so much that was lost during the Great War. There was so much that could have brought us to a greater humanity. I look at it like that, and I might be wrong, but yeah, when you're immersed in those places, you just think, what is it? What did these men have inside of them that kept them going, especially when they were surrounded by so much death? Like, you and I wouldn't sit there and be like, hey, last week there was, the however many years since the Battle of Gettysburg ended. How about we go from Gettysburg and we walk to Vicksburg and relieve the troops and bring over the siege? Like, it wouldn't be like, it may like, in theory we would do it, but the thought of walking from eastern Pennsylvania to western Mississippi is just not, like, in July. You and I would be like, yeah, no, we're good. Like, we like. So I think that, like, and you would walk through so many different places, but walking along the Western Front, you knew that they were fighting all along the way, and that there was, it was stagnant for the almost the entire time. So it's so different. You feel like you are absolutely enmeshed in history.
And I'm glad that you mentioned artists, because you are an artist, you are a photographer. and you have some amazing shots, not only from this journey, but other photography as well. You take beautiful pictures. And
Thank
I want
you.
to know specifically when we're talking about something historical and you are taking a picture, maybe of a cathedral or of a building or just the trail. How do you tell a story not using words, but just using your camera lens and using your innate ability to find the right shot?
I think it's intuition. I think that it just, I got this question in a different capacity before. And there was a lot of rain when I was walking. So it was also the weather that was indicating, because it wasn't like, oh my God, 50 miles ago, I saw the coolest thing. It might be sunny there today. Let me go back and see it, you know? But I think that it's just one of those, when you sit there and like when you were in Ireland on the Famine Way, like you can put your hand on the earth and it speaks to you. So what would be the difference between that and trying to find a place in the landscape that also speaks universally? If it's speaking to me, how do I use my camera instead of my words to tell this story and have people understand that there was a loss here, or that there was that the like I want my photographs to be evocative. I want there to be a sadness to them, an isolation, a loneliness. So people have to put themselves in the photograph and think, okay, if I was there, would I feel that way too? Would I see that? Would that become a part of me?
What about just absolutely getting out of the tourist traps, not necessarily focusing on Paris, for example, and just getting out into the actual parts? Not that Paris isn't actually a part of France, it obviously is, but
Yeah.
getting off the bus tours and getting off of the major tourist routes and getting away from the places that have souvenir shops and getting on the trail, immersing yourself in the countryside, immersing yourself in the small towns and the small villages, and maybe forcing yourself into a situation where you have to ask for people for help and you have to ask for accommodations, or you have to stop in a place that maybe doesn't have a tourist book about it, and you're going to have to find food and you're going to have to find clothing or whatever. So you're forcing yourself to talk to the actual people who live in this community. Sell people on doing that every once in a while.
No way, because then I'm not going to have it all to myself. if I
Okay.
sell people, if I sell people and tell them to do it, then it take no. I think that that's really. I think you're right. You go to Paris, and Paris is Paris. I mean, I was there last month, and it was beautiful. Blah blah blah. But if someone were like, "Oh, you're going to France," I'd be like, "Yeah, I'm not going to Paris." Like, Paris is. It's a beautiful city, but to go out to these other places, you get to see like their real friends. You get to see how real people live. It's like going to New York City and thinking that's all of America. It's not, that's not true. So, I mean, I think that the one thing that I would recommend is that people, if they were going to walk 500 miles across France, to maybe rent a car instead, because a lot of, trains don't go to the places that I went to, or like the connections you'd have to, it's all wonky and stuff. But I think that if you really wanted to travel and see a culture, see it for what it is. Don't what it's shown to you in the larger cities. You can go to a small city and you don't have to go to the Louvre. You can go to the Musée de Beaux-Arts there, and you get just as many incredibly, like, you get the artists that were born in these cities, and that they have their collective works of art there and not housed in the major art museums. So I think doing that, I think going to those smaller places lets you think bigger.
That is a great way to put it. I love that. It does make you think more deeply anyway. You realize that these are people, they're not just numbers. And when you read about something like World War One or World War Two in a history book, you're just hearing about numbers and strategies, and you're hearing about Wilson, and you're hearing about some of these major world leaders, but that's not really the story, especially when you're talking about a war where so many people died, so many people were injured, so many people suffered so greatly. And if we just talk about it as, well, this was the strategy and these were the fronts and this is where this happened, and it was because the Archduke Ferdinand was shot, and like all of those things don't tell the whole story. There Will Come Soft Rains. That is the book. What is one major thing, not just through the walk, not just through the photography, but then through capturing your journey in words? What was something that you learned and something that you want the reader to take away with them?
Oh, oh, you're speaking my language here. I love that question. I want them to realize that despite the ugliness in the world, there is such tremendous beauty. And that sometimes, you don't have to walk 500 miles across France to do that, to look for it, but look for it. Look for it in the sunrise, look for it in the sunset, look for it in the places that call to your soul. But look for it and try to find it every single day, even throughout the mess, throughout the wars. We are confronted with war every single day, but we're also presented with beauty too. And we need to reconcile the two.
What a great perspective. It's hard to think that you could be on a pilgrimage or on a hike, whatever you want to call it, that commemorates so much suffering and basically the worst of what humanity has to offer. And when you wrote about that journey, you came out thinking about the beauty in humanity and the positives in human nature. So that is such an incredible juxtaposition and probably such a great way to end this conversation. So, Briana, before I let you go, how can people get this book? How can they purchase it? Where can they get it where you get the most money, even? And where can they go to see some of your beautiful photography? Spend the last couple minutes we have here selling yourself because you deserve
Oh,
it for
God.
all of your hard work.
Rick, thank you so much. All right, so unfortunately, my book is predominantly available on Amazon, but they can email me if you want to put my email in the show notes. I can happily send them if they want to send me, like some food money or coffee money or whatever. And my photography, every once in a while, I have an exhibition or I'll do like a art fair or like a street vendor fair. I'm trying to get into other places as well, but still working on that. Writing the book took a lot out of me, creatively. I'm trying to add another syllable where one does not belong. But so I'm replenishing now. But they can find me on social media on Briana Gervat, and yeah, just Amazon mostly. I do get a decent royalty for that. So there's that, and yeah, just find me, and if you don't find me, find nature, find history, find the woods like I did today.
Absolutely. And I love that outlook to take history, and even when the things aren't all roses and kittens, to try to pull the positive lessons that we can from it. Briana Gervat, thank you so much for joining us. This was such a great conversation.
Oh, absolutely, Rick. Thank you so much for having me. This is a pleasure.
You made it to the end of the video, so that must mean you liked this conversation. Well, if you liked it, then like it. Click that like button right now. Make sure to drop a positive comment in the comments section. Those things really do help us. But most importantly, make sure that you are subscribed to the Domino Theory YouTube channel as we continue to try to grow this thing. It is important that we get as many subscribers as possible. I understand it might be slow at the beginning, but we need you to click that subscribe button. We have a lot of great content planned for the next few days, weeks, months, and hopefully years. We're going to be talking history and pop culture. We're going to be talking about it in a positive way, trying to do positive things, and we need your help. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon.